Okay, so here we are in Clip Studio Paint. So I'm going to go through a few features that I've noticed that really sort of separate it from Photoshop when it comes to doing illustration stuff. So here's a illustration which I completed last night, and I'm just going to go through and show you some things using this as my example artwork. So the first thing I should mention is the price. $49.99 for the sort of basic version, and then there's another version, Clip Studio Paint X, which is $219 US. At the moment I'm just using the Pro version, which can do everything that I need, which I'm basically using at the moment for illustration. Sort of messed around with the comic layers and panels, but not really so much with the sound effects and text and all that sort of stuff. In regards to illustration, when it comes to your brush, you have your eraser, but you also can paint using transparency. So what this means is that you can use the current brush that you're working on to brush away data or information or brush strokes or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to the eraser. So it's basically doing the same thing as an eraser, but what you might have noticed from using Photoshop before, if you've used it before, is that the eraser in Photoshop can be set to a brush that you're not actually using. So you would know what I mean if you use Photoshop. So you'll be drawing something with your brush that you've set, and then you go to erase it, and when you go to erase it, it's a different shape, brush shape. So if you can use the brush and you can paint in using the texture or the brush that you want, if you just press C in Clip Studio Paint, you then paint into that with transparency, which is removing it using the same brush, which is, I find, pretty handy. The brush settings in Clip Studio Paint Pro are quite detailed. You can change a lot of settings with the brushes. The stabilization, so when you're drawing something, it eliminates that wobble that you get when you draw slowly like this. So if you turn that stabilization all the way up to 100 and you do a same wobbly line, it comes out much smoother. So it really helps with drawing in the software. If you're sort of drawing slow outlines around things, that really helps having that stabilization feature. Just smooths it out. Next cool thing about Clip Studio Paint is the way that you draw straight lines. So if you use Photoshop, you will make a straight line, and what happens is, a lot of the time is, depending on your shape dynamics that you have, you'll end up with something like this. So you'll go to draw a straight line, and what happens is, it ends up being sort of like this. Usually when you're doing straight lines, you're drawing something which is sort of mechanical or hard surface or something, and you're not really wanting to have your line have any sort of dynamics to it. So the good thing about the line tool in this is that you can really intuitively sort of sketch up architectural or product design type stuff, and the lines are sort of solid and consistent. The next thing that I like about Clip Studio is being able to map hotkeys, and you can basically set it up to be similar to Photoshop. Shortcut settings, you can set it up to be similar to how you sort of intuitively use Photoshop commands, but then some things I find are much easier. I find zooming to be much easier, just using keys instead of having to use the magnifying glass tool. And another thing I like is, if you are sort of painting something like this, for example, with this brush, if you want to change to another tool, so say I want to change to the eraser, if I hold E, while I'm holding E, I'm using the eraser, and when I let go, it'll go back to my brush. If I want to paint something, say I want this color, and then I paint this next to it, and then I hold the blending tool, I can blend, let go, and it goes back to my brush that I was using. And this is a really intuitive way of changing tools, which I really like. I really like the way it feels to draw in this program as well. It just feels really sort of smooth and intuitive. And I just find another feature which I really like about Clip Studio Paint is the ability to edit and transform content across multiple layers. So in Photoshop, say if we had something like we had a blob, and then we outline that blob, put some eyes on it, and then some red hair. We can represent all those redheads out there. And let's add a pink nose onto him. How cool is that drawing? I don't know why I bothered with this. I should have just scrapped this and do more of this sort of stuff. It's kind of cool. So I got this cool guy here. So in Photoshop, say I wanted to make the face on the inside smaller, I would have to go through each one of those facial features layers, and then I would have to go and shrink these down, move them around, and I'd have to go through and grab my mouth and nose and adjust them. The thing I like about Clip Studio Paint Pro is that you can just select all those layers and you can transform them together while retaining the information for each one. So if I want to just shrink them and maybe delete this, like this section, it'll delete across all the layers, which is really flexible and really cool. Obviously Clip Studio Paint Pro isn't as good with all the photo manipulation stuff, as Photoshop was designed for that, and that's sort of the whole point of the program. It's not even supposed to be a painting or drawing program, so in that regards Clip Studio isn't really as good from what I can see. Maybe it is possible to do a lot of different things. I know there are adjustment layers, but they're called correction layers like in Photoshop, and a lot of it's really similar. Some things just have different nomenclature. So even painting style illustration or brush sort of stuff in Clip Studio Paint, it's pretty good as well, even though this used to be Manga Studio. So if we were to sort of do a painterly style piece, the oil brushes on this software are really quite good, especially when you sort of can blend them together and smooth out edges and stuff like that. I mean, that's a whole different video to go into the details. Painting with the brushes in here, because it's, as you can see, there's a lot of different settings to sort of tweak the brush to how you want. You can adjust the size, the amount of paint, density of the paint, and the color dynamics as well, and the density of the brush, which it's sort of like you're drying out the brush. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up all the features of Clip Studio Paint that have stuck out to me in my first sort of few days of using it. So as you can see, it's a much more intuitive drawing program than Photoshop, because obviously from the ground up it's been built to make comics, because it used to be Manga Studio. And yeah, like surprisingly, once you get used to it, it's kind of hard to go back into Photoshop and draw with it. I've mainly been using Photoshop to finish off the artwork with a few color adjustments, and I really like the grain filter and stuff like that in Photoshop, but overall I'm definitely going to be using Clip Studio for illustration stuff a lot more, especially for line work, sort of flat illustration stuff. Maybe not so much for the painting. I still need to practice that a bit in Clip Studio, but I think down the track I'll definitely be using it for that. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and check me out on Instagram and all that if you could. All the details are in the bottom. And yeah, stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.